Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker is riding high into the holidays. His latest public support numbers show by a vast majority the Commonwealth has his back, with a 70% favorable rating and just 15% unfavorable. Joining me now is the man behind this poll, which goes well beyond Baker's numbers, David Paleologos, director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center. David, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So you guys looked at Baker's popularity a few months back in the spring, right?
Right.
What change, if any, has there been from then to now?
In the 100-day poll, his favorability dropped, I say dropped, from 74% to 70%. And his job approval is fixed at 70%. It's amazing.
How do those numbers compare with past governors? I mean, I think of Governor Patrick for a lot of his time in office as having really high approval numbers. How does Baker stack up?
With Patrick, he had a couple of missteps early on in his administration, so he kind of dipped and then came back up.
I recall some drapes.
Yes.
We don't need to run through it all here. Yeah. So he dipped and came back up.
He did, as governors go and as incumbents go, it's an amazing number because 11% of the state is registered Republicans, and here's Charlie Baker at 70%. Easily outdistancing the Democratic U.S. senators, both of them, and constitutional offices. So it's an amazing number.
Is it noteworthy at all that you mentioned his favorability dropping 4? His unfavorables are up from 8% to 15%, so I guess nearly doubling. Is that something that makes you raise an eyebrow at all?
Slightly. You do have margins of error on both ends of those polls, so the unfavorable upticks, and we expected that. I actually thought that his favorability numbers would be in the 50s or 60s, and when I looked at the crosstabs, Baker's favorability dips, I say dips, to 59% among registered Democrats and among younger voters in the high 50s.
Those sound horrible. Yeah.
Right.
You also looked at what the public thinks of the stance he took on the Syrian refugee resettlement question. What did you find there?
Well, we asked it a couple of ways. We asked it more generic, do you agree with what other governors have done, like Charlie Baker, saying that you don't want the refugees in Massachusetts, or you don't want to accept them. And then we asked the question of the vetting issue, which is, if they were properly vetted, would you want them to resettle in the Commonwealth? And 51% said that they did. And that number actually goes up if you look at some demographics like women, high 50s, Middlesex and Essex counties, high 50s, and of course Democrats, 64%. So you've got some support, and it's the vetting issue that people are hung up on.
Well, and that seemed to be sort of where the governor maybe did a little bit of evolving. He would say he didn't, but on day one, as I recall, he took a harsher tone. On day two, he was a little more welcoming. But it sounds like either way, the public likes both of those variations.
That's true, and it's not impacting either his job performance number yet or his favorability.
What do people think of the opioid-related proposals that you sized up, the forcible confinement proposal and the proposal of the governors to limit prescriptions for new opioid use or users to 3 days only?
The confinement issue, which would limit for, against a person's will for 3 days, was an amazing number, 65-22 supporting that, and I thought that was going to come in around 50%. Not only from the medical issue, but from the civil libertarian issue, that kind of thing. And again, support on the 3-day prescription for first-time opioid prescriptions. So again,
a little bit lower, but still the public is supportive.
Sure, it's still a net positive of 20 points or so. So those are good numbers for him.
All right, let's talk national for a little bit, because you guys also sized up the New Hampshire Republican primary recently. You say it's close to Trump-mate in New Hampshire. Why is it close to Trump-mate, statistically?
Because his core support in New Hampshire, which was 22%, is pretty faithful and pretty loyal. And if the remaining 78% is split 6 ways or 5 ways, relatively evenly, when you do the math, it's 22, trumps the average of the other 5 or 6.
Is that intentional or unintentional?
No. But when you look at the percentages, the 22 holds up. Now, other polls have him higher in New Hampshire. We had him at 22%, so it could be higher.
Who's his big competition up there? Or who could his competition become?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Rubio. We're seeing Ben Carson flatten and drop. We're seeing the same thing with Fiorina. The new candidates are kind of going by the wayside, except for Trump. So Rubio, in that New Hampshire poll, he showed he was #1 second choice. He was #2 in terms of electability. majority.
And great favorable, unfavorable numbers
Had the highest
too, right?
number one, highest favorable, unfavorable among all the Republicans. So those are signals and those are signs and a thread on the poll that certainly look good for him.
Last question for you. How do Massachusetts voters feel about the presidential contest?
Well, on the Republican side, it's 32-18 for Donald Trump, and that's even higher than New Hampshire.
Did that surprise you?
It did. You know, and I wonder if his support of Tom Brady during Deflategate and Bob Kraft is worked its way into the Republican primary. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton is winning by 25 points, 52-29. And she looks pretty strong in Massachusetts. Of course, she beat Barack Obama by double digits in 2008.
All right, fascinating stuff in a really bizarre election cycle.
Indeed.
David Paleologos, thank you for being
Happy
here.
Thanksgiving. Thank you.